later. I'm Don Harris. I'm going to be just helping with tech things here for this call. I'm going to introduce your presenter, and the person that's probably going to do all the heavy lifting in this is Reverend Dr. Ruth Shaver. She's coming, as she said, on behalf of Pathways. She's the council chairperson for there. She's the lead author of a coming environmental justice certificate program, and she's also the interim pastor and teacher of the Congregational Church of Mansfield in Massachusetts. So, Reverend Dr. Shaver, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you. And it's always good to reconnect with friends that I only see on Facebook these days, which is kind of fun. And hi, Salome. Salome is also a member of the Pathways board. So Salome and I work together. It would help me to kind of just know where everybody is coming from in terms of your church and what your circumstances are and why you chose this particular workshop. So if we could just go around, Emma, if you don't mind, you're muted, but if you wouldn't mind starting, that would be great.
Okay, I'm from Thomasville, Georgia. Pastor James Banks. I'm in the choir, and I chose this because I'm interested in coming back to what we used to call normal.
And Catherine.
Hey, I think climate justice is important to me. I think about it a lot, and I think I was in the social hour last night. I was on with somebody in this group. I don't remember who it was, and I mentioned that I watched one of the things I watched recently and was really moved by was the day the earth changed, just realizing how the less we were driving and using power and just really making a mess, making our daily routine mess of the earth, without all that, it was very impactful. It had a positive impact on the earth, the climate, animals, coral reefs. I mean, we learned a lot, and climate justice has been important to me my whole life, and I'm just really glad that the UCC is now, it just seems like it's moving forward in maybe every phase of life, but I'm really excited about this work. So sorry, that was a very long answer, but thank you for doing this.
That's great. Well, you're very welcome. No, that's great. And it's good to know that you've got some background in this. Some of what I'm going to talk about is probably old hat to you, but that's okay because it never hurts to have all the details and have it in different ways. And Bert, what about you?
Hi, I'm from Brookmaid Congregational Church in Nashville. We're in a 70-year-old building. During the pandemic, we've taken quite a hit on membership and active participation, as everyone has, because there's no steady draw for new folks coming in, so there's been a trickle of folks moving away. We're finding we're going to have to make a number of changes to our building, leaky roof and whatnot. We're going to sell off some of our real estate. We have some pieces of scrap land alongside that we can sell for a good price and get some working capital. But all of this gives us a clear entrance into a time of change. How should we change? What do we need to do with the land? What do we need to do with our big old 70-year-old building? It's nice. Looks like a 50s vintage ranch-style house at first glance. But what should it look like, and what should it be in the 21st century? So these are questions I guess we're all grappling with one way or another.
That's great. And hopefully I'll have some suggested starting places for conversation for you with the congregation. You'll come out with some ideas, and hopefully among us we'll generate more. And Salome, did you just see Pathways and decide to come?
Actually, no, I didn't see the Pathways part, unfortunately, but I'm here because we know there's so much that needs to be done. And I'm wondering, what are our options for moving forward?
All right, well, that's very helpful. And one of the wonderful things about being able to do this virtually is that I get to share my screen. Unfortunately, when you share your screen, in Zoom, it means that you can't also read your presenter's notes. So you'll have to pardon me, I'm using my phone to do that. Technology is a great thing. So my name is Reverend Dr. Ruth Shaver. I am indeed the chair of the Pathways Academic Council, and I'm also the secretary of the board. I got invited to be a part of Pathways while Sarah Kim was still on the conference staff. She invited me to facilitate a course. And then Lou Kavar said, hey, come join the board, which at the time was just the advisory council, as he was looking to expand what Pathways could do and make it more national as opposed to regional. So I've been affiliated with Pathways for about 5 years now. I've facilitated courses, I've written courses, mentored various folks. It is God's generous way of saying, well, you thought you were going to be an academic and I put you in parish ministry and now you get to be an academic again. And so I get to do the best of both worlds. So that's really my love for Pathways. My particular interest in the justice piece of this is that my doctorate at Lancaster Seminary was actually at the intersection of faith and science. And I wrote a vacation Bible school curriculum that is hands-on science for people of all ages in church, which was a great deal of fun to write. And writing for the environmental justice series that we're doing, especially the level 1, has allowed me to dovetail theology, biblical studies, and church history with science and scientific observations and science methodologies. So I'm really enjoying the writing of that because it allows me to explore both passions that I have. So this is statistics heavy, and I apologize for that, but I think the statistics, hopefully the way that I've done this, the statistics will tell a good story and point us in a good direction. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we will come back to, Deborah and ask her to tell us about herself in a moment here. Now I just have to, okay. All right, so let's see if I can get Zoom to go away so I can reach, come on, there we go. So I titled this Pandemic Possibilities Cleaner Air. And this has kind of been haunting me since I saw versions of this picture. This happens to be from CNN. That is the Himalaya Mountains in the background from a city in the Punjab region of India. And it had been upwards of 50 years since people had seen the mountains from places in Punjab because of the air pollution in the area. So one of the lessons that we learned early on is that we can, with will and discipline, make some substantial changes to the environment in a very short time. And as you can see from here, this was within 15 days of the lockdown in that region and how clear the air got. Part of that was the weather. The weather was conducive to cleaning the air faster, but that the air stayed relatively clean for about 60 days before people started moving again and before the weather patterns changed and meant that air was being stuck more. And there's all kinds of meteorological reasons for that to happen. So I apologize that you can't really see the scripture there, but I did choose the Genesis 1:26 from the New Revised Standard as sort of the basis for this. Let us make humankind according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over the cattle and over all the wild animals and over every creeping thing that crawls upon the earth. And that, of course, is speaking about human beings and our relationship to creation. Whether we think of it as dominion or stewardship says a lot about how we feel about our responsibility for caring for creation. And there's a lot to be said for thinking of it as stewardship instead of dominion, which I think is where a lot of the environmental justice work now is focusing, especially interfaith work, because dominion seems to be something that's particularly Christian in origin. Judaism and Islam in particular have more of a stewardship aspect in relationship to creation. And other faiths also have some sense of caring for nature. And of course, secular humanists and other atheist groups also have more of a caring piece, whether they call it creation or the earth or whatever they might call it. But air pollution in particular is one of the first ways that the federal and state governments became involved in cleaning up the environment. I don't know if you've seen pictures from the Denora smog of 1948. It's Denora is a town outside of Pittsburgh, where literally because of a meteorological event and heavy industry in the area, a poisonous fog sat over the valley for many, many days. And it killed 20 people and left thousands of people ill, including some who were ill for the rest of their lives. Finally, the zinc works, which was the primary polluter in the area, shut down its furnaces, and then rain came to clean it out. But that was the first time in the aftermath of that the federal government began to measure and work toward federal clean air laws. And then, of course, when the Environmental Protection Agency was created by the Nixon administration, that became a part of the EPA's work, and we have clean air rules and that kind of thing. But air pollution in particular is measured in these 6 different components. So you have ground level air ozone, which is the bad kind of ozone. We need the good ozone to keep the radiation from burning through and getting us so badly. And I think we're all old enough to remember the hole in the ozone layer and how much we had to cut back and how many regulations were changed in order to deal with that. And that apparently is mostly healed over. You don't hear about it very much anymore. Then there's particulate matter, which is anything that comes out of a smokestack or a tailpipe that can float in the air or can linger in the air in any way. And there's various different sizes of that. The ones that are most of concern are 2.5 microns or smaller. And those are the ones that can be inhaled and can get into people's lungs and do damage. Carbon monoxide is mostly an indoor pollutant, but it is something that can affect outside, especially if the weather patterns are such that wind doesn't dissipate an emission of carbon monoxide. Lead is still a problem, although it's not nearly as much of a problem now as it was before unleaded gasoline became the only kind that you can get in the United States. Sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide are both very toxic gases. They have different effects, but they can both affect the human respiratory system and they can affect the amount of oxygen in the air. Nitrogen dioxide is one of those gases that has its good side too, because it's laughing gas. It's similar to laughing gas, but it can replace the oxygen in your bloodstream over time. So these are some of the things that are measured by the EPA and some of the things that are part and parcel of the problems that we have. Sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide, along with carbon dioxide, are 3 of the big greenhouse gases. So even though carbon dioxide is not considered an air pollutant per se, it is part of the greenhouse gas family. And part of that is because sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide, nitrogen in particular, react with other chemicals and create carbon dioxide. So that's how that all works together. This video is an explainer from NASA that shows some of the work, some of the ways that nitrogen dioxide levels changed during the pandemic. Hopefully you all will be able to, oh, you know what? Bear with me just one moment. I'm going to go set my, I knew I was going to do something silly. Oops. I knew that if I, okay. I jumped a step here. I have to share the sound and do a video clip thing. Okay. All right, let's see.
Computer models of Earth's atmosphere can tell us a lot. Trained on how the atmosphere typically operates, the models take in data about temperature, wind speed, humidity, and more to give us important insights into the world around us. Computer models like NASA's GEOS model can help us study how chemicals move through the atmosphere, how the oceans circulate, and where air quality might be affected by fires and pollution. These models can also provide a look at what might have been if circumstances were different. For instance, climate models can forecast how temperatures might change with different levels of carbon emissions. In 2020, the world threw the models a new test when people began behaving very, very differently with almost no warning. A global pandemic set in. Around the globe, people stopped driving and flying in large numbers, started staying home, and completely changed their pollution patterns. In particular, emissions of nitrogen dioxide, a common air pollutant released by cars, airplanes, and many factories, declined significantly. But just how much did the shutdown change our emissions? NASA's GEOS atmospheric composition model offers an answer. The model run functions by assuming that nothing was different in 2020, that people continued behaving roughly the same as they would have with no activity shutdowns, adding the same number of atmospheric pollutants to the air. It's then a matter of subtraction. Comparing those models to real-world observations made by satellites during the shutdowns shows how significant the decrease in pollution was in various cities. Activity shutdowns started in Wuhan, China, and in January, observed emissions of nitrogen dioxide began to diverge from what models predicted, about 60% less than predicted, that is. As the virus and the associated shutdowns moved west, European cities began to experience decreased levels of nitrogen dioxide emissions as well. In Madrid, Spain, nitrogen dioxide emissions were also 60% less than modeled. Shortly after, cities in the United States began to follow suit. In March, New York City shut down all but essential activities, and emissions dropped by 45%. 50 of the 61 analyzed cities show nitrogen dioxide reductions between 20 and 50%, clearly linking lower NO2 emissions to pandemic-related restrictions, and therefore human activity. This sudden change in human behavior gives us new insights into the relationship between human activities and air pollution, which still has many unanswered scientific questions. The only way we can fully understand air pollution is by combining surface observations, satellite data, and computer models. With NASA's satellite monitoring system and computing capabilities, it's uniquely positioned to provide detailed information about air quality everywhere in the world.
I always like it when I can provide information from NASA, because people often wonder why we're spending money on satellites and space when we have so many problems on Earth, and yet so many of our problems on Earth will better be solved because we have satellites in space. So these are some of the images from the video that you just saw. This is the northeast region of the United States. You can see the urban sprawl from the Washington, D.C. area all the way up through into Connecticut, and then some of the urban sprawl along the Rhode Island shoreline all the way up into New Hampshire. So this is the average nitrogen dioxide concentrations from March of 2015 to March of 2019. So it's the average for the month of March. You can see along the shores here in the Milwaukee area, and you can also see Cleveland and Pittsburgh are very heavily impacted as well. And I have to admit, I'm kind of surprised that it's not as bad in Boston and Providence as it is in other places, especially given how bad the traffic is. And I don't know if that's because those are colder months and nitrogen dioxide is affected by temperature, or if it's because we do have so much good public transportation here. I really don't know what that difference is, because traffic in Boston is just as bad as it is in New York City and Washington, D.C. Oh, sorry, that's March of 2020. I can't read it because your beautiful faces are covering it up. This is March of 2015 to March of 2019. And the quote is from Wallace Brecker, who's a climate scientist at Columbia University. It's terrifying how different it is, isn't it? I mean, even Boston starts to get some of the purple, but it's still not as bad. You can see Milwaukee and Cleveland. And I will say this about Western Pennsylvania, where that sprawl begins, where that line of ridges is. I actually used to live right where that sprawl, where that line of red and orange begins in Western Pennsylvania. It's right along the first of the ridges of the Allegheny Mountains. And the first of the deeper red as you go west from there is Johnstown, Pennsylvania, which sits in a bowl of a valley. And quite often, going to Johnstown to visit people in the hospital, I would drive through very smoggy fog because of that bowl. And even though Johnstown's industry has mostly gone away, it was still not a very clean air city. So you can just see the effects of lots of transportation by cars, by trucks, and industrial use as well. We are poking our climate system with a stick. So this is the 2020 view of the southeast coast of the United States. You can see that Atlanta is still fairly heavily involved, and your urban areas like Chattanooga, Raleigh, and that would be Nashville up in the left-hand corner there, Bert? Would that be where Nashville is, or is that Knoxville?
That's Knoxville. Nashville's off your map.
Okay, that I couldn't remember. Yeah, but up in that very left-hand corner up there, there's another area there. So this is 2020 compared to the GIF here that just shows you the difference and how much area is affected, because air pollution never stays where it starts. It moves with wind currents and with weather patterns. And then there's the side-by-side comparison of the two areas. And it's a dramatic difference. And I know from experience in Atlanta that Atlanta traffic can be just as bad, if not worse than Boston and New York and Washington, D.C. So you can really tell the difference when people weren't going anywhere, which is truly dramatic. And so that's a good thing. So this chart fascinates me because this is the change by month from 2020 to 2019. It only goes through November because the data was only compiled through November. But this is petroleum demand overall. So this is all uses of petroleum, plastic, diesel, jet fuel, gasoline, that kind of thing. You can see it goes up a little bit in February after it came down in January. They speculate that some of that blip might have to do with the fact that the world was beginning to close down. And so people were out scrambling to get supplies as the shutdown moved from China across to Europe and then over to the United States. You can see that huge drop in April. That's when the vast majority of the world was under lockdown. And the primary vehicles on the road at that point in time were delivery trucks. Most air travel had been shut down, and cars were hardly on the road at all. I mean, I know that from the 15th of March until Memorial Day weekend of 2020, when I was still serving as an interim pastor in New Hampshire, I did not leave the confines of the town of Conway, New Hampshire. And I think I put a total of 110 miles on my car, going to the grocery store and a couple of visits to the hospital, just to check in on people before they close the hospital to visitors. So, you know, that's significant. And this is the comparison of the three different kinds of fuel that are the primary products of petroleum. So you can see the drop in diesel. It was stable in February, but gasoline did go up in February. And again, that's the speculation about people scrambling to make sure that they had the supplies that they need during the lockdowns. Jet fuel really began to decrease. It decreased some in January and some in February, and then it took a hit in March. And then 65 and 68% less jet fuel in April and May. And you see that continuing from all of the different ways, and how it didn't really bounce back. It came back a little bit in December, but not very much. And it's still down now, even though air traffic is certainly picking up. The TSA reported 2 million passengers for the first time since the end of 2019, just recently, going through airports. So this is certainly something that has had a huge impact on air pollution. So the statistics say that we drove 15% fewer miles in the United States in 2020 than in 2019. And if you had told me that that was ever going to happen, I'd have laughed at you, because I grew up in Texas and we got in our cars for everything. A, it's too hot to walk anywhere, especially now. And B, there's nothing close by. So you get in the car and you go. Well, in talking with my parents and my brother, who still live in Texas, once my brother got laid off because the store was basically closed for a couple of months, and then they came back very slowly, his truck sat in the driveway and didn't move for almost 2 months. You know, he drives a pickup truck. They got their groceries delivered. They got, you know, the only time the cars left the driveway was for doctor's appointments. And once the beauty shop opened up, my mother's weekly beauty shop appointment, because, you know, self-care is important. And I don't know about you all, but I'm usually putting 15 to 18,000 miles a year on my car. It took me 11 months to go the 5,000 miles to get an oil change. And that included a couple of unnecessary drives to get me there so that I wouldn't go a full year on the same oil change. There was a 7% decrease in gashouse emissions from various industries. cement and steel in particular, and that's because, of course, construction stopped for a long time, and the steel industry then had nothing to do because there was no building construction, no road construction. And of course, the funny thing is, all of us here in New England, we're saying, we're not driving, fix the roads now, please. Do it while we're not driving. But of course, the problem with that was, how do you make sure that your road crews are safe, especially as they were working on that. So they did do quite a bit of road construction before people really started going out much. How much construction was done in your areas during the lockdown? Anybody notice that they were doing that? Yeah. And of course, some of it depends on weather and whatnot too. This is the one that interests me most. So there's a 10.3% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions from energy producers in 2020. Some of that is directly related to the ways that production of energy is changing anyway. So coal plants have been decommissioned over time and have been replaced by renewable energy, or in some cases by nuclear, as I know they're working to do in Georgia. But there was also the decreased need for energy because so much real estate in the retail market shut down, and because big office buildings were closed because people were working from home. So this has a multifaceted, has been impacted by multiple forms of energy change. But the fact that we could do this is really telling. And I think this is one of the things that we can grab onto to make lasting change in our environment. And there was an overall 10% decrease in US greenhouse gas emissions from 2019 to 2020. So that's all the factors considered. There is a study being done now to determine how much of that decrease from power plants and traffic and that kind of thing has been offset by greenhouse gas emissions from the wildfires in California and the West last year. They estimate it might be as much as 3%. So it might only have been a 7% overall change. But the fact that industrial greenhouse gas emissions came down 10% in 1 year because our habits changed is huge, and it's a very instructive lesson for us. And this is an incredible statistic. And again, this is something I never thought we would see in my lifetime. The United States produced roughly as much electricity from renewable sources in 2020 as it did from coal. And that is the first time that that's happened. And again, that's increasing use of renewable energy resources and decreasing use of coal, in addition to the changes in human behavior because of the pandemic. So that's very hopeful to me. So then the question becomes, what can we as people of faith do to help make these reductions permanent? And there's sort of three ways that I like to think about that. First of all is what we can do personally. The second is what we can do in our own congregations. And the third is what we can do as a community of faith in connection and conjunction with other communities of faith and other groups of people who are working on that. So the first things are family actions. What we did during the pandemic that worked for us in terms of allowing us to continue to earn a living and to function as families, we can keep doing. So, you know, if you can still work from home, you know, if your employer allows that. And there's we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes too. But, you know, if you've got the wherewithal to do it, take public transit instead of driving your car. If you can do it, or when you can do it, trade your car in for an electric or a hybrid vehicle. Ride a bicycle if you can. Now, I know in a lot of places it's not safe to ride a bicycle. And again, that's something we can talk about in a few minutes. I believe that this is true across the country. I know it's true here in New England. We have the capacity with our energy provider, our energy company, to choose who generates our power. So we can work with their partners to choose a renewable power generator, offshore wind or whatever the case may be. And you can usually find that information out from your power company. So whatever your electric company is, you can often find that out. They're also the people who will call you and say, I'd like to speak to the person in charge of the electric bill. And then my annoyance with them is that they won't email me information. They want to tell me all the facts over the phone. I'm like, no, I need it in writing. I need to see that kind of thing. So I confess I haven't done that yet, but that's mainly because the people that have asked me to do it are, as I've done the research, are not reliable, renewable power generators yet. They have too much non-renewable in their power sources. I'm hoping that that will change in the next year or so. So this is something that cracks me up. I have friends and parishioners even who talk about the fact that the Amazon truck is at their house every day. One of the things that we can do, and it sounds ridiculous, but it's true, is instead of shopping at Amazon every day, shop at Amazon once a week so that it's a bulk delivery. Amazon, for all my problems with them, they are working on creating greener fleets and that kind of thing. So, maybe we'll start to see more electric vehicles on the road from Amazon. But the same thing is true of grocery deliveries. If you've got, I know around here, Stop and Shop uses box trucks to do their deliveries. Those are diesel powered. And if if you're getting groceries delivered 3 times a week, try to do it once a week so that box truck is only on the road once instead of 3 times. It sounds like it wouldn't make a difference, but if everybody did it, it would make a huge difference. And then, of course, there's your usual energy conservation measures at home. Nowadays, everybody's got LED bulbs, so of course that's one to do. But even the older LED bulbs that you have, or the old coil things, even those are not as efficient as the ones that are available now, and the price is coming down. So even replacing those older energy efficient bulbs can make a difference. When your appliances wear out, replace them with more energy efficient ones. It is true now that modern dishwashers take as little as 4 gallons of water for an entire cycle. And that means you're only heating 4 gallons of water, which means less electricity use and less water use, which is really important. If you have the wherewithal to do it, updating your heating and cooling systems for efficiency and whatever resources burned. New England is very oil heavy in terms of our heating and cooling systems, or heating especially. And so we rely on fuel, heating oil in the winter. I happen to live in an apartment complex that uses natural gas, which makes me slightly happier than oil, but I would love it if they would put a wind turbine on our building and generate power that way. That's a long-term goal. And then this is the one that kills me. Set your thermostats higher in the summer. Lower in the winter does not bother me. I can live in the cold, but setting my thermostats higher in the summer, that's rough. I'm definitely somebody who likes to be cool rather than warm. And then something else that people take for granted, but if you have property and you can do it, plant trees for shade. Because a shaded house really does take less energy to keep cool in the summer, especially. And we learned this firsthand. The parsonage that I lived in New Hampshire had this gorgeous old oak tree in the yard, and it shaded the entire southern exposure of the house. It was wonderful, except that it was in danger of falling over onto the house, so we had to take it down. And the amount of energy that we used, it so happened that they took the tree down the day after the bill closed, so it was a stark, dramatic difference. The electric bill just for the fans in the house, never mind air conditioning, because I didn't have it at that point in time, almost doubled just to keep the house comfortable. And of course, everybody was very sad about losing the tree. And then they were, why can't we just put a tree in that's that big? Well, you know, trees you got to plant ahead of time. So then there's church actions. And this is some of, Bert, what I hope will inspire some conversation for you. One of the things that you can do is complete an energy audit for all your church property and remedy wherever possible. And you can usually get an energy audit from your power company. There are also contractors that can do that. They'll come in with an infrared camera. We actually had one done again in New Hampshire because they were getting ready to renovate a building. So they came in and did an energy audit before they started the renovation, so they would know exactly what they needed to do during those renovations. And it turns out that the daycare center that was using that building was probably spending almost 3 times as much as they needed to on heating and cooling because of the loss of heat and cool air during the different seasons. So an energy audit will help you find the leaks where you're losing hot air and cold air. It can also help you find unused appliances or appliances that are drawing too much energy and help you to determine whether it's cost effective to replace them. It can help you figure out where you need better insulation, and it can also tell you when it's time to replace your windows. And all of these can be upfront costs that sound prohibitive, but if there's a way to do it that you can be saving money instantaneously, sometimes it really is worth doing, or at least to make a plan to do it over the long term. You can also investigate solar and wind possibilities for your property. During the renovation, they looked at placing south-facing roofs or solar panels on the south-facing roof. They didn't do it immediately, but they're still thinking about doing it because it would save them in the summertime in particular, considerable money on their cooling bills, which is really good. And then if you've got property that has a rise on it or a steeple that could either be replaced or strengthened, you know, we used to put cell towers on steeples. Well, now you might be able to put a wind turbine on a steeple and generate electricity that way. If you've got church-owned vehicles, update them to hybrid or electric vehicles. And of course, planting trees for shade. And this is something that I really hadn't thought about until it happened in a parking lot around the corner from my house. They redid the parking lot and installed solar-powered electric vehicle chargers in the parking lot, which to me was an invitation to that particular company's customers to upgrade their cars to electric vehicles. You know, what a great way to witness for a church to have both the vehicle charger, but also for it to be solar powered in the parking lot. So, and just to show you what's possible, this is First Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Ann Arbor, Michigan. They are part of a program in the Universalist Unitarian Association called Green Congregations. And there's been 3 iterations of that program, 2013, 2019, and then the current one is 2030. And each one had a different focus. So this is the result of the 2019 focus in the whole denomination for upgrading campus power and sustainability. So they put solar panels on their south-facing roof, and they installed a 90-foot wind turbine. And on their website, they talk about the fact that people look at their turbine and see it as an environmentally friendly steeple. That's become one of their landmarks. For their 2030 certification, they're going to be looking at mitigating their own carbon footprint further, and their adaptability and resilience to natural disasters, especially climate change related disasters. And during this program, congregations can work with either an environmental group to reclaim and adapt and support an ecosystem that's been damaged by climate change and make it more resilient over the long term, or they can work with community organizations that are doing disaster mitigation and strengthening the adaptability and resilience of communities in the face of climate-driven disasters. So it's a multifaceted thing. It's both an internal and an external program that they're doing. And I just think that's very cool. And I hope the UCC will do something similar for us over time. But we do know this, all of this can be done. And then as people of faith, both in individuals and as congregations, there are things that we can do to take community leadership actions. Collaborating with other faith communities and nonprofits can really help a community come together around renewable energy development. I apologize for using mostly New England-based examples, but it's what I'm closest to right now. There's a gas compressor station in Weymouth, Massachusetts, which has been online now for about a year. Many faith communities got together to fight it and to try to get it moved. When they initially said it in one area, they did move it, but they didn't move it all the way out of an economically depressed neighborhood. So it is still in a place where people of color and people living within 200% of the poverty line are more deeply affected. There's now been several instances of I'm trying to remember what they call it, of flares and gas leaks from the plant. And so those community groups are now working to get it closed. A similar compressor station for the same gas line has been canceled now for an area closer to the Rhode Island line. And again, it was a collaboration of faith communities and nonprofits that came together to stop that. In part because where they were going to place it was again in the poorest part of town and within a 5-mile radius of about 6 elementary schools that were servicing children of all economic strata and races, but again, 3 of them primarily service either people of color, children of color, or poverty-stricken families. So that's been shut down, which is good, but it shows you the power of community and the power of coming together. Your church can promote and host educational events about air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. And if you live in an area where there are folks who are doing this work either as community organizers or working on it from the university perspective, from the research perspective, those are great resources to have people come and talk. And this is one that didn't occur to me until I read it in a New York Times article about pastor in an area who was going around talking to the business leaders in his congregation to encourage those business leaders to let their employees continue to work remotely and to continue to do all of their business meetings as much as possible remotely, like on Zoom and that kind of stuff, instead of using air travel for their meetings. And he said he wasn't entirely sure whether it was going to work or not, but he was hoping that would do some good. in terms of making them at least think about that the good impact of reducing commutes and air travel. Those two stories that I told about the gas compressor stations are good examples of collaborating with local and regional officials. Anytime there's regulations about any industrial sites, any plants, it's a good time for a church community to get involved and to find out, what is being planned, and is there a way to change that if other people are going to be hurt. Even things like bike lanes and bike paths when traffic regulations come up. And if there are ways for communities to offer incentives for homes and businesses to do energy efficient upgrades. And then, of course, the big one is to promote rapid transit development and use. And this is particularly important in larger cities when they're working on new bus routes or on expanding trains, that kind of thing. If churches can advocate for those bus routes and for trains and for other rapid transits mechanisms to reach more people and get them more places, it can make a huge difference in how we are using our energy resources and what we can contribute to the decrease in air pollution and thus greenhouse gas emissions. So I want to open it up for discussion and ideas, and please feel free to ask questions that I will answer to the best of my ability, or I will confess if I don't know something. I've learned to say I don't know pretty well. And if you've got any ideas or tips, so free floor.
Ruth?
Oh, yep, go ahead, Salam.
Well, this is sort of thinking out loud. I agree with everything you say or said, but I live in the South, and every 2 years we've had a ballot initiative to have a bus system in Snellville, which is a suburb of Atlanta. And every time they vote it down, there's no bus here. And the primary issue is the bias of believing that people who ride buses are going to steal.
Yeah.
And in many cases, these are people of faith who think that somehow someone's going to break in their house and take a large screen TV and walk down the street with it and sit at the bus stop and wait to catch the bus with the large screen TV. And I try to remind them that often it's the people with the cars who are driving up, stealing stuff, throwing it in the trunk and driving off, not the people who are riding the bus. So that's the first thing. How do you change the mindset? The second thing, I normally don't watch Pat Robinson he comes on 9 o'clock here every day, but I did watch him yesterday, and he was talking about climate change, and he has a mega following, as you know, of evangelical Christians. And he was suggesting that because other large countries like China and Russia were not going to participate in the actions that we wanted to take for climate change, we should not do anything either, because it would cost businesses money. They would lose money. So how do you respond when this is being shared with the evangelical who believe Pat Robinson that, well, if they're not going to do anything, our efforts mean nothing. They'll be so insignificant that nothing will change. How do you respond?
I don't know.
Okay.
Well, the research has shown that when people have kind of a core belief, confronting them with other facts doesn't help. So sometimes listening to people explain why they believe something gives you an opening to ask questions that will make them rethink, but it's a long process.
Yeah.
And
we've been trying for 9 years to get buses in Snellville,
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, this is where we run into the intersections of science and personal bias and faith and a desire to, put off personal responsibility and everything else. So yeah, it's tough. And I'm not entirely convinced that, well, first of all, China has been using coal, but they're also developing nuclear and that kind of thing. So they may not have joined the Paris Climate Accords, or they may not be doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing for them, but they're also developing technologies that are cleaner than the ones that our industries have been using for the last 50 years. So, and the same is true in other parts of the world. But telling people that and getting them to believe and act on it are two different things. So a lot of it is, unfortunately, we just have to be the patient ones who listen and ask questions, and and there is some truth to the notion, and I love this one because it actually was spoken by a man, and I thought that was hilarious. He said, women have been past masters at letting men think that something is their idea. And that's generally how you get people who are conspiracy theorists to change their mind, is to let them think that something is their idea.
Okay.
Like, okay. So, yeah, Bert had his hand up, and then Catherine.
You do what you have to do.
Exactly.
As we watch the pandemic here in Nashville, our economy is very heavily reliant on service industries, travel industry. A third of our economy is the travel industry. About another third is colleges, universities, and education. They took a devastating hit. Our air quality was fantastic. We could see clearly way off in every direction, but there was nobody to look at it. And our public assistance figures went way up. Unemployment went way up. And hasn't really recovered yet, although it is doing so somewhat. And as it does, all of the other measures that we love are becoming worse and worse. We have cars from our neighboring state, Kentucky, of course, coming in that have their infamous black license plates that say coal. It's what keeps the lights on. And the political powers are very heavily invested in maintenance of coal. We have no private energy companies or anything. It's a service of local government, as is the Tennessee Valley Authority that generates all of the electricity in this region. And it's one of the most notorious polluters on the planet. Where are the points of intervention without causing economic disruptions?
Ooh, that's a good question. One of the things that I think is a real potential for places like Nashville and all across the center, sort of the central part of the country there, is the expansion of rail service. That can keep, especially if it's good, not coal powered electricity servicing the rail service, but that can keep the tourist industry going without the air pollution.
Great idea. Essentially, our state legislature a number of years ago banned development of light rail, saying that any light rail system could only be built if there were no railroads nearby, and they had to use, they didn't want to have, they wanted to make sure no state money was used to build a rail system in the cities, is what it amounted to.
Right, yeah.
It's a challenge.
Yeah, of course. Advocacy for, even the federal budget, the federal infrastructure budget that's got a provision for expansion of rail service, could be a real benefit to the city in the long run. Even something as simple, it's not the best possible upgrade, but where there is bus service, advocating for change to natural gas powered buses. It's an intermediate step, but it's still better than diesel fuel. Advocating for replacing buses with, hybrid or electric buses, that kind of thing. Again, if your energy is being generated by coal burning plants, it's not necessarily, the offset may not be as great as you want it to be, but a lot of it is literally educating people and helping people become advocates. One of the things that the Environmental Justice Certificate program that we're working on is designed to do is to give people a good basic education in what environmental justice is and how important it is for reclaiming the world, as it were. And then the next two levels are going to be about community organization and then advocacy. So how do you organize a community to be an environmentally just community? How do you organize them to identify and work through environmental justice issues? And then how do whomever feels called to work on policy become advocates for policy and that kind of thing? Thankfully, I don't have to write the second and third level certificate programs. I've already said that's not my bailiwick. But there's the levels to it. So part of it is becoming informed about different ways, and not everything is going to catch everybody's passion. Some people are going to be very passionate about transportation, and some people are going to be very passionate about locally sourced power generation, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of conversation to be had yet about the kind of nuclear power generation that never got off the ground because people heard nuclear and got scared, which is completely understandable. I mean, I lived at Offutt Air Force Base when we were still doing nuclear missile drills in school. And even in second grade, we knew that was silly. But then 3 Mile Island happened. I was like, oh, maybe this isn't so silly after all. But there's been so much research about other ways of developing nuclear energy. Maybe it's worth having the conversation about that. There's going to be people who are distinctly anti-nuclear, but then there's going to be people who will be, well, do we really want to look at this? Because, all of what we need to do to reduce these greenhouse gases is multifaceted, and it may not be feasible for every place in the world to have solar and wind. One of the other things that's possible, depending on the regulations and that kind of thing, is in a lot of places there are actually rules against homeowners putting solar panels and that kind of thing on properties. And so even advocating for the removal of those laws can help, because that's a way of helping people find their own means of independence. So a lot of it is education, and I think a lot of us feel this overwhelming need to do it all, but sometimes it's necessary to focus in on one thing and run that as far as you can, because that will have cascading impacts as people become more aware of things. And Catherine, you had a
well, so I think I was just thinking about Bert and construction and projects that you're working on at your church, and I don't think I said I'm at Circular Congregational Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Now our church is in the historic district, so we get a lot of tourists coming through there and host a lot of events for our community, and often have people in our buildings who don't take care of things the same way we would, leave lights on, leave ancient HVAC system on, things like that. And so we've had to think a little bit we're trying to think a little bit about how we might better control the use of our resources, and how we might better also use our literal geographic location, which is got a prominent street side on one of the most traveled streets in Charleston, to do some education and draw people in. So we're working with we flood when it floods. We have we're gonna paint use the blue line. I don't know if you know about the Blue Line project, but our climate working group is going to use some of our space for that. So if you have a way to use your buildings as education, like the church in, where was it? The UU church that had the, that's awesome to me. That is, I think, preaching. But also, Bert, I mean, we had in 2008, we built we had to build an education building. We were just running out of space for classes. And the group that put that plan together, decided to build a LEED certified building, and installed everything we needed for geothermal, which now is the place where we try to meet the most, because it's it's more it's just better for the environment. And that building also has a green roof. So, I mean, those are all like wonderful things to do. I wish that, I think we might've been the first LEED certified building downtown in Charleston.
Cool.
Definitely the first with a green roof. And that was 2008. So that's kind of late to the game, I think, for a city like Charleston. But I wonder, I guess in question wise, I wonder, I think this would fall under maybe personal actions and church actions, Ruth, but we've been talking in our climate working group a lot about carbon drawdown, because if we're trying to reduce our carbon footprints, that's something we can do. And you mentioned planting trees, but I wonder also about encouraging our congregations and working in our communities for more community gardens or climate victory gardens, or whatever you want to call them. Like planting ground cover. If you can't plant trees, plant alfalfa, or, just really basic things you can do for not very much money, but to educate, just to start getting the message out about climate drawdown and how we can do little things in our lives. You don't have to plant a tree. I live in the city. I can't, but I can plant some alfalfa. I can not mow my grass, for a while, and let some weeds and little wildflowers grow. But I don't know. What do you think about?
I think that's all great. And the other thing that occurs to me is when you have the opportunity to replace asphalt with growing things, take it. So if you can, one of the other things that Ann Arbor did, and it's not visible in that picture, is they have a garden area, and their garden paths are just, kind of mowed, probably now walked down paths, but they didn't pave through that area. So there's always the possibility for growth in that area. So I think, I'm not 100% sure, that they reclaimed some of that area.
Are they disabled accessible?
Yes, they're fully accessible that way. So, because it's all, the paths are wide enough and it's all ground level. So there's not very many, if there's any elevation, it's minimal, that kind of thing.
Excellent.
And they have a children's play area that is likewise accessible, and it's not an asphalt play area. It's got the wood chips and that kind of thing. So and the green roof thing is really cool too. So even if you're not building a new building, but you can find a way to make the roof green, that would be awesome. A friend of mine and I were talking about the fact that somebody needs to develop shingles that they're piezoelectric shingles that will be like black in the wintertime and white in the summertime, especially here in New England, so that, you can absorb heat from the sun whenever it's sunny and reflect sun when it's, too hot, that kind of thing. So all of these things, every little bit helps. And I think that's the other piece of this, is that, nothing is impossible if we all act together. And so if each of us does our own bit toward it, that's really helpful. There's that cost benefit analysis. Oh, go ahead, Bert.
Does the UCC, I'll ask, does anyone know of any resources available to help cover the front load expenses on making these transitions and switches? I could see. I mentioned we're getting ready to build a new roof. Why not go for solar? But it takes a much larger investment than we have available in cash right now. How do we do this?
Right. Check with your insurance company. I know the UCC Insurance Board has some funding available for upgrades and that kind of thing, if you're insured through the UCC. A lot of insurance companies will have similar programs. Check with your local power company. to see if they have grants. The New Hampshire Electric Co-op is how the solar panels are going on the renovated building eventually. They had funding to cover about 2/3 of the cost, I guess, total. So, and, it contributes back to the grid, so it reduces the cost. And there may also be grants available from local universities and that kind of thing that are working on stuff. You might be able to do a research project with them. So definitely check with that. You can also check with the EPA in your EPA region. They may have a resource list for you.
Thank you.
Dr. Shaver, I just want to alert on time.
Okay, yeah, we got about 2 minutes.
Because I do want to give people a chance to go get another cup of coffee or whatever, and then get ready for the next one. Exactly.
Well, let me just do my little spiel here for I've told you a little bit about what we're doing with the Environmental Justice Certificate Program. We're focused on all of the ways that environmental justice is important for the world, not just climate change, but any race-based issues, industrial development, and global climate change effects. And that's how you can find us. And we're rolling out the first 2 courses for the Environmental Justice Certificate Program this fall. And anybody and everybody's welcome to take them. My reviewers are telling me that they're really enjoying it, so that makes me happy. So as long as all my resources are still available, we're good.